All right, welcome back to the Nexus Podcast. Rob King is my guest. Rob is the Director of Applied Research at RunZero, and lately he's doing a lot of work on the security of OT assets, and we're going to spend a lot of time getting his perspective on some of the things that he's seeing out there. So, good to meet you. Thanks for doing this.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Let's kind of start at the sort of the semi-beginning here with convergence, digital transformation. Is this another facet of technology where we've kind of moved too fast without dragging security along?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no, like anything. So, OT used to be, and sometimes still is, this utterly grade-separated network, different physical media, different protocols. If you want to talk to it, you have to be on the factory floor, connected via, a modem or a radio link or whatever. And that is still the case, in some situations. But the economies of scale with commodity protocols like IP, TCP, commodity media like Ethernet, it's really, we're chasing that that scale and that price point. So we've started lifting OT protocols into the TCP world. And that's great because it makes them more accessible. It makes them easier to see. It makes them easier to talk to. That's worrisome because it makes them more accessible. It makes them easier to see and easier to talk to. So if you can see it, your attacker can see it. It now could theoretically talk to the whole public internet, which is a whole thing.
So obviously you're seeing some really big risks being elevated. Is access to these assets the big one, or is it just kind of like the front door?
Well, so OT devices are interesting. And I want to say there is a huge amount of work in improving security in OT, a huge amount of protocol work, a huge amount of OS work, patching, and all that. But OT devices have a very long life. It's not unusual to see an OT device that's 25 years old. That's not weird. And those devices, maybe they can't be patched. Maybe they can't run the newest software. Maybe they can't run the secure protocol. Maybe they can only be patched once a year when the factory goes, that particular line goes down or whatever. Maybe the vendor's gone out of business. That's a thing that happens.
That happens, yeah.
And so while security for OT is improving leaps and bounds, you still have this long, long tail of devices that are kind of hanging out. And so those can't be patched. And so there's still this huge attack surface. And it is shrinking slowly, but it's certainly not going to shrink particularly quickly. And also, this is a sea change in the way these devices are connected. And so a lot of times, security is, I don't want to say it's an afterthought, it's just a different priority, right? Like, this device needs to make sure the motor spins. Everything else is secondary. So,
and then you have, I guess I have to advocate a bit to engineers when you're talking about OT in terms of securing devices and just kind of understanding what they do every day, and then they need to understand what guys like you do every day to protect these assets, right?
Yep. And it's interesting too because these devices, because they are what they do, to a greater extent than just about anything. There's no in the IT world, there's this history of huge security breaches. And it's been sort of beaten into the industry that security breaches are bad. I mean, they are bad, right? Whereas with OT, that's still sort of maturing from a practitioner standpoint. And that's not because the practitioners aren't trying their best. They absolutely are. It's just, it was a different focus for the industry.
So, and in terms of, attacks against IT for 2-3 decades now, we understand them and we know how to deal with them for the most part, or at least try to. With OT, are we still not seen enough at any kind of scale attacks against OT to I dare to say take them seriously, but you know what I'm going here.
So again, everybody, pretty much everyone is absolutely doing their best, but it's very easy to, relatively speaking, to go in and create a new cloud instance of something running the latest patched software. Nobody has a spare factory. Nobody wants to spend the millions of dollars an hour that a factory is going to be costing when it's not producing something to go in and upgrade devices and patch devices and test devices. So the fact that security is being thought of at all is, I think, great. And I think that the easiest bang for the buck is going to be segmentation. Just because these devices, you're always going to have these older devices, you're always going to have these unpatched devices. The only way to protect them is to not let attackers get to them.
And how successful is that today? What's the reality about segmentation?
It's not as good as you would think. It's better than you fear and worse than you think, maybe, is the way to put it. There's still, to this day, hundreds of thousands of OT devices just connected directly to the public internet. The other day, I scanned for every device speaking Ethernet IP on IPv4 and found several thousand. So they're there, and I could talk to them, and they were very happy to just tell me whatever they wanted, whatever I asked. Don't try that at home, kids. So that's basically zero segmentation. Then there's the segmentation problem of a lot of devices will bridge networks and you won't even know. For example, if you have say you're a developer and you have a laptop and you're running Docker, Podman, or something, a lot of times various runtimes will enable routing on your laptop so that those machines can talk to each other. But that also turns your laptop into they don't limit it to just those machines. So now your laptop is a router. And if you connect to multiple networks, you're now a bridge. We see that with printers. We see that a lot with SIP devices, Ethernet IP devices. You might have multiple links to two different places, and they don't show up in a topology diagram. So segmentation is important, but segmentation only works if you can verify it and actually know what is bridging those segments.
And is that a gap in terms of capability, that verification? Or
I think so. Networks are hard.
Yeah.
They've gotten so much better. I can tell you all sorts of war stories from the early 2000s with multi-protocol routing that would make you cry. But it's gotten significantly better. But it's still hard to tell, especially if something doesn't talk or doesn't talk much. You basically have to go in and verify configuration or do something like an active scan to see what can be reached.
Yeah. Let's talk about the real bugaboo, too, in terms of vulnerability management, exposure management. Is it smart to think about these issues in terms of exposures versus vulnerabilities when it comes to OT, and why or why not?
I think so. I think that's a really good way to put it. Because everything's always going to have vulnerabilities. And the thing I keep harping on is that, OT doesn't get patched as often and sometimes can't be patched. So it's always going to come down to exposure. It's always going to come down to, can I actually reach the device to exploit it? And even if there's not a vulnerability in the classical sense, these devices are controlling and affecting things in the real world. And so even just overwhelming them with traffic, even if nothing's malicious, can still cause serious real-world problems. So, yeah, I would say exposure is probably the best way to think about OT security.
So is that how you're defining exposure, for example? Is it kind of the reachability part of it?
Pretty much, yeah. Reachability, and I love talking about segmentation violation, and I love saying it that way because it sounds like, the old segfault, Unix thing, so I get to conflate the terms. It's always fun. But yes, segmentation violations are a big deal to me, and I think that they are going to be the next frontier, which is a great choice of words, for finding... For protecting and finding holes in your armor for your OT network.
All right, so let's talk about the offensive side of this, what attackers are doing to kind of leverage these exposures. And you hinted at it. It sounds like they're fairly easy to enumerate, given Shodan, Census, whatever tool you prefer. How low are these barriers to entry?
So... security by obscurity is not security at all. A lot of these protocols are paywalled or hidden or unusual. And it's kind of interesting in that there's a lot of older protocols, proprietary protocols. There's a huge amount of common knowledge that floats around about how these protocols work. And sometimes that's correct and sometimes it's not. But what it's led to is I'm trying to think of the best word, not amateur, but non-practitioner view of how to enumerate these devices and how to find them and how to discover them and how to talk to them. And sometimes it's not safe, right? Like we've seen devices where trying to enumerate them using what is the quasi-standard out there will damage the device. Will cause it to go into a fail protect mode, and it's a huge deal. So having these protocols be relatively obscure, they're not just HTTP, they're SIP. SIP's a whole thing. SIP's not even just one protocol, right? Variants on Modbus, variants on DNP3, even just accidentally addressing your DNP3 discovery could cause something to stop talking because it'll only talk to one primary at a time. It's a huge deal. So, yeah, finding these devices, enumerating these devices does come with risks, but it can be done safely.
What kind of device asset information is being returned? You said you can if you could talk to a device, what's it going to tell you? Is it strictly version number, stuff like that, or does it go a little deeper?
So it's a lot of these devices. So what's interesting is the older you go, basically there's zero self-identification going on. Like if you go and look at just pure classic Modbus, the best you're ever going to get is on a serial network, it'll say, I am device ID 2, which tells you nothing. But then you get on the other end of the spectrum, things like SIP, which is a virtual protocol that has multiple different adaptations onto different network layers, Ethernet, CAN bus, device net, all that. With SIP, you can get an immense amount of information. You can say, give me your identity, your serial number, your manufacturer, your model name, your product ID. You can introspect all of the IP addressing on it. You can enumerate the backplane and find out what's connected, serially to that device, which is super fun, actually, because you can see some really neat things.
Right.
I love doing that. So you can get a lot of information back, but it's not always super useful. The number of devices that I scan, and it says, they all have serial number 000 or manufacturer unknown or some just random long string of digits. There's a certain OT manufacturer who I will not name, who their internal IDs do not correspond to anything you will ever see in a product catalog at all. You know who I'm talking about.
So I guess that was my next question, is like, what is an attacker looking for? What's useful, what's not?
So
how do you mask this stuff if possible?
Right. And basically you don't mask it. You segment off this network. What attackers are looking for is these devices at all. If they can find one of these devices, that already gets them in. Maybe it's useful as a pivot. Maybe it's multi-homes. Maybe they can transit traffic across the backplane. Maybe it's just now they have a foothold where they can, get into the network and persist. Or now they just have their attack target. These are so high value in a lot of cases that even just being able to claim I can take this device down or knock it offline is enough to get, some ransom or some fame,
Sure. And so are we seeing attackers looking for assets, collecting assets versus organizations, I guess?
So, attackers are, since the early days of the internet, back in the last millennium, for everyone who is old like me, that's terrifying to say it that way, people have been scanning the public internet. It used to be thought, you can't scan the whole internet, and now it's trivial to do, right? It's trivial to scan the whole thing. So state actors and attack groups, yes, they absolutely have persistence and lists of devices that are ready to go at the touch of a button, which is technologically impressive and a little scary.
And what's holding them back, I guess, is the natural follow-up question there.
So I think the thing that's holding them back is, A, they're not necessarily being held back. We see active attacks. We see vulnerabilities on OT devices getting added to the CISA Kev list, the known exploited vulnerabilities list. So these are being exploited in the wild, often by state actors. Foreign militaries, spy agencies, three-letter agencies, all that. But another thing that's holding, I think, some people back is and again, I don't want to use amateur, but bang for the buck for certain things like ransomware or whatever is a lot easier to do and a lot faster on an IT environment like, a hospital or an office, right? Sure. If your goal is just to make money and not sow chaos, there might be easier targets out there.
So most of the attacks might be disruptive versus destructive.
Disruptive versus destructive. which is my new band name, actually. And they also are definitely going to be used as even just the act of discovering itself is, like I was saying earlier, it can be dangerous, right? Mm-hmm. So, and they don't care. They really don't care.
Yeah.
So segment your networks, people, please.
And in terms of the attack groups themselves, you brought up state actors a couple of times. Are you seeing, lesser skilled groups kind of jumping on the geopolitical bandwagon and, I don't like what XYZ country's doing. I'm gonna help them out even if I'm not on the payroll necessarily.
Everyone who says they're not on the payroll ends up on the payroll eventually. But yes, I do think that there is, everybody talks about Anonymous. Nobody knows who Anonymous is. Anonymous is not one thing. But there are people who do threaten these devices. And there are people who just go and, they'll probe a device and maybe knock it offline and not care. And then go and brag to their friends, hey, I took down this thing at the tire factory. And it might be so simple as just they go in and they reset the device and the factory is fine, and maybe they add redundancy, but it might be that there was an incident and now it has to be filed and it's cost money, and now you've got to figure out what to do, and it's and that's what we're paid to do.
So these groups aren't necessarily a front; they just get recruited eventually, or
I mean, it all kinds.
Yeah.
And also there's the whole point of plausible deniability, right? Like a lot of these groups are, I am not affiliated with XYZ because, sure you're not, buddy. Sure you're not.
And from your experience, why are these assets online exposed to begin with? Is it a remote maintenance kind of issue or just...
So some of it is, convergence happened in the OT world by OT standards. IT-OT convergence happened extremely quickly.
Right.
So a lot of these people were told, now we're going to use this and we're going to get this online. And they don't necessarily know that if you connect it in a certain way, it's going to be exposed to the public internet. They don't know. They don't need to know. That wasn't their job. So for a lot of it was they did everything correctly, but things like IP management and IP network segmentation were not ever part of the playbook. And now they are. Like I said, people are working very hard and doing a great job, but it's still relatively new in the grand scheme of things.
And talk to me a little bit about some of the legacy protocols and the security issues that you see there. I know there are a lot that have been there for decades and just kind of, they work, nobody wants to touch them, but
right.
There's some definite gaps.
Yep. You can't see me out there in Radio Land, but I'm smiling because I really love writing protocol parsers. It is the best part of my day. So these protocols are extremely convoluted. So every OT protocol is either 1 byte header and 1 byte command, or an entire XML object model that has, deep trees and whatever. There's no in between, and I'm only being slightly facetious. So these protocol implementations tend to be very, very boutique, right? There's not a huge market for Ethernet IP SIP implementations. There's not a huge market for Modbus implementations. And they were coming from a place of, when they were written, these systems need to be online, and if you get a message, you need to turn the rotor 90 degrees and don't worry about anything else. So these protocols don't have encryption. They do now. Some of them do now. But these older protocols, they don't have encryption. They have things like DNP3 when running over TCP are basically the entire physical and addressing layer and everything else lifted and put on top of a TCP session. So now you have 2 addresses. It's getting out of hand. And so this all leads to, parsing issues, vulnerabilities where even just exposing configuration, exposing management interfaces. And when I say management interfaces, I don't mean the physical interface. I mean just there's a SIP object that you can touch and it does things. And that actually kind of brings me to another thing where a lot of these protocols are, and I'm not saying that I could do better, but a lot of these protocols are simultaneously underspecified and overspecified. There's a lot of things that you would think you should be able to do that you just can't in the standard protocol. It's just not possible. And so there's a lot of proprietary extensions to these, and every proprietary extension comes with a risk. not every SIP object is going to return the same attributes, or if you want to enumerate, if you want to get the number of backplane slots on an RS Logix controller, the easiest way to do it in standard SIP is to kind of enumerate everything. It's a little weird, but there are proprietary vendor objects that will tell you more information, but those are hidden and secret and undocumented, and you got to use the vendor's tool, which is super fun. Don't get me wrong. It's like, I love working with that sort of thing, but it increases the attack surface. It gives you more things to test, and not necessarily everything gets tested, because that's from a security standpoint, because that's just not the priority.
Mm-hmm. Is it relatively easy pickings? I mean,
it depends on what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Basic identification of OT devices and basic speaking of these protocols has come an enormous way. Ethernet IP, I love you. I can just send a broadcast UDP and I get back so much information. You're so great. And then you get to, actually talking SIP and virtual objects and classes and interfaces, and I still love you, SIP, but man, you're making it hard. But it's a lot of fun to write these parsers and these probes. I do love it.
And from a factory's point of view, or you name it, is it a huge lift to go from Modbus to the more secure version of Modbus that includes encryption and whatever else?
So, yes, in that a lot of these devices, and it all goes back to these devices are often old, often underpowered, or not underpowered. They have to be exactly what's going to work in a hot and noisy, vibrating environment, right?
Sure.
So you're not going to get the latest and greatest. You're going to get hardened and simple. And that's a trade-off that is important to make. But that means that they're not necessarily going to have a lot of extra CPU time to encrypt messages or things like that. Even if they can be upgraded, right? If they're new enough to even have that patch supported. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of devices that only tangentially support these protocols. The number of proprietary protocols and proprietary tools is just massive. Even devices that claim to support standard protocols, often you can't do something important via that standard protocol. You still need to use that vendor's tool.
All right, so before we wrap up, let's talk a little bit about kind of from the defensive point of view. Mm-hmm. We've talked about segmentation, an important tool. What else? I mean, is it a matter of just keeping these things off the internet?
Definitely do please keep these things off the internet. Segmentation is definitely, I think, the most powerful arrow in your quiver. But just like, these devices are kind of sort of IT devices now. Patch management is a thing. Vulnerability management is a thing. Risk acceptance is a thing. And risk acceptance has always been a thing in OT networks, but now you have to add the dimension of, cyber attack to your risk assessment. Right. Is it worth not patching this device until the next, factory downtime maintenance window in 3 months? Yes or no? Mm-hmm. And oftentimes the answer is going to be it's not worth it, right? Mm-hmm. Because shutting down a factory and stopping making, tires or blocks or whatever your factory makes is more important, because that's the goal.
It's probably a lot easier to quantify in a factory too. If we're down for an hour, I know it's going to cost me X million dollars.
Yep. No one has a spare factory.
Right. All right, Rob. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
It was great being here. Thank you so much.
Alrighty.